Hey everyone, I hope those listening are feeling good, and I would like to welcome you to the new podcast. Girls Club is a community that empowers women and is a safe space for all females. My name's Chloe Major and welcome to the first episode of the Girls Club podcast, where, as a community, we support women challenging issues within society. If you're wanting to break the stigmas and help empower women, then this is the podcast for you. So today we are joined by Anna Arrowsmith, who is the first ever British female porn director, and she has also been reframing misogyny since the early 90s. It is important for women to come together and discuss the many challenges that as females we have to face. If there's no conversation, then how can we progress? Anna, my first question for you today is how you decided that being a porn director was the path for you.
It's an interesting one because if I look back, it's something I was sort of interested in when I was much younger. I always had quite a strong sort of abstract sexual imagination. I was never like abused or anything like that when I was a kid, but I always used to make my Barbie dolls and Ken and Barbie have sex and things like that.
You know what though, I feel like that's like secretly such like a normal thing that no one really talks about.
We sort of talk about boys having sort of sexuality when they're younger, and people sort of laugh at little boys have erections and stuff like that, but I think girls do too. And if you read, there's a book called Women on Top by Nancy Friday, it was a big book in the 90s, and she went around and interviewed loads of women about their sex lives, and lots of them talk about having, you know, from a young age, having quite a sort of active sexual imagination. And then I was very anti-porn when I was in my teenage years because I started to become much more feminist inclined. And in the 80s, mid 80s, because I was born in 72, so by the mid to late 80s, I was in my mid-teens, it was banned the top shelf in the UK by Claire Short, who was a politician who was campaigning against magazines and stuff. So it kind of, those two things get kind of conflated. And it's not until you get in, I think it's 1988, that Women Against Censorship in the UK starts, and you get the first kind of separating of those two things. Feminists Against Censorship, I'm sorry. You could possibly be a feminist and also be pro-sex.
Okay.
By pro-sex, I really mean the actual proper meaning of that, because if you talk to anti-pornography feminists, they'll say that they're pro-sex, and then they'll list a load of things that they don't like. Well, by pro-sex, I mean all sex, pretty much. I mean, you know, I'm not talking about sort of forcing people or you know, paedophilia or, you know, animals or whatever, but you know, anything that can be done is acceptable within consenting people. And so there was this idea that you could also be feminist, and that happened. And so, I mean, I have this epiphany walking down Old Compton Street when I'm 16 years old in 1988, where I realised that my anger at the sex work and the strip shows and the magazine shops and everything that men had was actually a form of envy, that I actually thought women don't have this for themselves. And this is before the Chippendales. If you look back, I wrote about the sort of male stripper experience in my dissertation for my undergraduate fine art film video degree at St Martin's. It was way before that, and so women literally didn't have anything. There was a program on TV that came on by Margie Clark, and she presented it about sex, and it was, you know, it was absolutely groundbreaking because there kind of was nothing on TV before. Definitely. So I just thought, you know, what is the female Soho? What would it look like? And then I end up doing my undergraduate degree and my final project, like you're doing now.
Oh my God, you know what? That's so weird. The different kind of times of everything, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm in like 98. I graduate. So this is sort of 10 years later. I'm writing towards a new pornography, and it looks at what a female perspective on pornography would be. And I was actually censored by Central St Martin's. They wouldn't play my final film that had urinate. Yeah. In an experimental film course, so I learnt a lot in one go. Yes, so people like to think they're experimental. They're not really. And even in the sex industry, if you go to sex clubs, you'll find that some people are into bondage, some people are into rope play, some people are into this, some people are into that, and they'll you know, a fair number of those people will be, those people over there are outrageous, that's immoral, they shouldn't be doing that. So it still exists even within kind of the experimental world of sex, that people blame each other and you know, chastise each other. So we're an odd bunch, humans, really.
Oh, 100%. I can definitely back that.
Yeah, and if you look at the hypocrisy around the anti-pornography movement, and also that you can see parallels with the anti-gay movement. There's I forget what the name of the website, but there's a website that outs gay men who are campaigning actively in the States against gay equality, who are themselves gay. And there's a lot of hypocrisy. People watch pornography and then campaign against it and feel absolutely, you need to be sort of religious for that to make sense, I think, but certainly conservative, but people will do that. And they'll use sex workers as well. I mean, moralists will use sex workers. You can interview any sex worker, the people that they're dealing with are not people who are pro-sex work often.
Yeah, and it's always just such a contrast, because there's so many men out there that will kind of like disregard like women who like work in strip clubs, but then they'll go home every night and watch porn, and it's like, how can you slate all these women when you're literally their number one consumer? Like, it's just so
it's that. I mean, and also when I started this website called WeConsent.org, because I wanted to bring people in the industry together, because unfortunately people in the industry do it as well. It's like there's like a hierarchy of sex work, of which porn is actually probably at the top, and maybe high class cool girls, sex workers as I call them, but you'll hear porn stars say, oh, I'm not a sex worker, or prostitute as they mean. I'm not that. I'm not a stripper. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm a porn star. So you do get, unfortunately, people, building this hierarchy that is whorephobic, as they call it. And so, I don't know why people feel the need to do that. They could be a little bit more liberal.
I know, it's sad, because I feel like, there's always going to be such a strong stigma against the industry, but I don't think it helps sometimes when the people in that industry still kind of don't like believe in themselves, you know, like some people get embarrassed if they work at a strip club, but it's like, you shouldn't be embarrassed if you're working there, you should be owning it.
Exactly. Yes, and it's it's made difficult because families, they don't tell their families and stuff like this, so they have to have these lives that are kind of secret, and they have pseudonyms and stuff like this. So I mean, it's unfortunate. I don't know why we're so I guess you could look back and say the sort of Judeo-Christian kind of teachings that we've had over hundreds of years have made us
I think it's
very shameful of sex.
So my next question for you is, so do you support kind of all sex work, and do you agree that the stigma and negative taboo should be changed kind of in general and around the world? Because I didn't realize that there's different levels of sex work in each country, and it's kind of like the views are just so different in each country, and it's obviously harder for women to come together internationally if there's like such different laws in each country.
Yeah, there is. And unfortunately, I mean, if we talk just for a moment on sex workers, on the people who are physically being paid to have sex with other people, historically called prostitutes. The laws around that, there's certain levels of liberalism. If you look in Germany and Australia, and certain areas have legalized it. But it doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't really lead to a lot of emancipation for the workers, because you get people who then go and work for, the equivalents of sort of McDonald's for sex work, where they have to go and work for these big places where people pay a bulk fee to sleep with loads of people. And you sort of look and see these, if you legalize it, then it's like weed in California, the big companies are getting in. Okay, that takes out the criminality of it and it makes it safer. It also brings prices down, which is fine when you're talking about weed. But when you're talking about sex work, where someone has to do a very intimate act, which ought to cost a lot of money, because it is a psychologically and socially precarious role that they play, and it should be honoured financially for the work that they put in. And some of them end up working for sort of $20 or $30 equivalent a go. And that is not better. And some of them will be saying it was better when it was illegal, because then I could charge more and stuff like this. So it's a very difficult situation. A lot of people get into sex work because they don't have much time. They're a single mother or something like this. They've got to look after kids and they want to make a lot of money quickly. Unfortunately, they take risks because it's illegal, but when it becomes legal, you just wonder what the alternative is, really.
Definitely. I mean, it's just crazy seeing like the different levels, you know, and I think as well, if it just must be so hard for women having to, you know, do that all the time. I mean, I've watched quite a few documentaries like interviewing like prostitutes and stuff, and the stories that, you know, that they say, and most of it is to do with the law enforcement itself, and it's like how can we make them safe? Like, it's just so dangerous. But it's, you know, and there's always going to be people that say, oh well, it's their choice to do it, they signed up for it. Well, no, they didn't sign up to be abused or, you know, anything like that. It's just, I feel like people just really are uneducated on everything, and that's why they have their own opinions.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Swedish model, which is what unfortunately a lot of countries are taking on, which is where they don't prosecute the sex worker assumed to be female, but they prosecute the customer. That's they've seen as like an excellent idea, but sex workers are universally pretty much against that model, because what happens is it goes much more underground, and they have to see their customers very much in sort of secluded areas and stuff like this, so that the customers don't get arrested, and that means that they're personally put into a lot of physical danger. And you know, and also other models where you if you legalize it, there's a difference between decriminalization of sex work and legalization. So legalization is where you know, there would be a situation where a city allows people to have licenses to do sex work, and they get to choose whether you do it or do not, and you know, they'll check on condoms and stuff, which is great, but that also necessarily means that they're not going to let some people do it, so there becomes a black market. So the unlicensed ones are going to attract the people who are bad customers, you know, violent, etc., because they are going to know that they are, you know, vulnerable, and they're not going to be found out, and they're not going to be supported by the police because they haven't been licensed. So the way around that situation is decriminalization, which is just the removal of the laws which say that sex work is illegal, and that is what pretty much universally around the world all sex workers want, just the decriminalization. Just take away the laws that make it illegal. We will run a business, we will, you know, do tax returns, etc., but we don't need a license, we don't need checking and stuff like this. So it'd be like opening a clothes shop or something like this. Yeah, that's what people want, and they're not getting it because people aren't listening to sex workers. And unfortunately, you've got a lot of so-called feminists who are quite happy to have discussions around the rights of sex workers without inviting them to the table, which is really sad. So they're just left on the menu.
It's just heartbreaking, because, you know, I didn't realize, you know, coming into the industry, because for me, you know, before I started university, I didn't really know kind of much about the industry. And then as I started working, you know, I worked as a dancer for a bit, and now I kind of do more online stuff. But the people that I speak to and the experiences that I hear, it's just so much of it. But I feel like as an outsider, you're never going to know what really goes on. And I think that's the problem. You're not going to really know about the industry from some random person who thinks they might know, when realistically they've just looked up some facts on the internet.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think it is important to kind of discuss it and kind of just get out there like what's actually going on, and kind of
absolutely. Yeah.
So as a female, it's empowering to see other women changing the stereotypes on sex, specifically porn, because to this day it's still such a controversial topic. I think this is because of how a lot of porn companies have accepted, you know, like revenge porn, underage porn, etc. But as a woman, you've managed to completely take away the bad elements and have kind of turned it into creative work that embraces female sexuality. So as a professional in the industry, what do you think needs to be done to ensure that porn can stay safe, you know, not be such a bad or scary place for people to go into if they kind of want to work in that industry?
Well, you've got to deal with society's attitudes towards it. There are countries that are much more relaxed. Scandinavia, for instance, ironically, we were just talking about the sex work there and how bad they are, but they're pretty relaxed about pornography. You've got to have an education situation and a cultural change in the way that we look at it for those people to feel safe to talk about it. But on a sort of industry specific level, it's a tricky one, because as soon as you start saying people have got to be over 18 to go onto websites, it is how are you going to prove that? So the minute you start saying you have to put in credit cards before you can see the videos, before you can see any samples, if you like, that's what happens with my website. If you go on my website, you can see something free, like a short little clip, and then you have to pay to see the whole thing. So really the only thing anyone under 18 is going to be able to do, unless they can steal somebody's credit card, because you can't get a credit card under 18, is look at the small short clips. The governments have tried to make it even harder, but really that's not going to work, because kids are going to get around it technically somehow. Really what we need is an education around sexuality and about pornography as not being real. It's a fantasy thing. We need to teach to kids that this is a performance. They're not expected to do these things themselves. Consent is absolutely central, etc. And stuff. And unfortunately, what have we got? We've got people who are fighting against even talking about being gay. If you look at states in America where there's this don't say gay rule, where the tutors aren't even allowed to talk about people being gay. It's like going back to the 80s in the UK.
It is so you've got horrible.
Yeah, so there's a conservative, I knew these things work in waves. And when I was doing porn and everyone was talking about porn, there was so many documentaries. I did loads and loads and loads of interviews for documentaries and news programs through the early 2000s. I knew the backlash. So it ebbs, so it flows, and then it ebbs. So it has to come back. And we have just gone through the last sort of 10 years of being fairly conservative about porn, and we will relax about it again. And thankfully the general move is towards more kind of liberal attitudes. We're becoming less scared of things. You have to be conservative when you're scared of things. When you're not scared, you can be more open-minded and progressive. Yeah. So when people have got kind of used to the idea that nobody died from watching pornography, we will get another flow, and it will go, and it comes and goes, but hopefully we're working towards more liberalism. It's worrying in the States because you've got a wider discussion around women's rights as well, with the attack on abortion access and stuff like this, but England's never been as extreme as the States, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to touch on your point about kind of education in schools, because I remember when I was in school, when we had sex education, it was never, I look back now and think what I know now, and I think nothing about consent, nothing about gay sex, nothing really about masturbation or the reality of porn, nothing about that was ever spoken. And I think that's why children can grow up kind of confused and uneducated, because they'll end up learning stuff from porn thinking that it's real, or they'll find their own way to learn about stuff. And obviously there's so much fake news and kind of fake information out there. I just think they really kind of need to change how they're educating children about sex, because
they need to make it compulsory as well, which I don't know that it necessarily is everywhere in England. I don't think it is in America, but it's worrying when parents get to take their kids out of sexual education, because why? What is that about? It's about them, keeping them closeted of something, and they should be sort of made to teach them the basics. It's not going to go into everything, but it's not going to talk about BDSM, but it is going to talk about consent and where the clitoris is and stuff like that, important stuff.
My next sort of question for you is, do you think OnlyFans is an empowering way for women to post their X-rated content? Obviously the woman kind of has control over how it's filmed. It is a business. You have to prove that you are over 18 to be on the site.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't checked out OnlyFans. I've heard about it. They were kind of unfortunate in that they kind of reacted against sex work. I don't know if they reversed that, but I know they
did. Yeah, there was a massive outcry about it. Right. Sex workers I remember being on Twitter, and it was just tweet after tweet, there was such a big uproar about it, because OnlyFans isn't just for kind of explicit content, but that is the majority of how they make their money. So it's why are you wanting to take away? That's a lot of women's jobs, the X-rated that.
They don't, and the answer is because those people they see the money, they don't do porn, they're not motivated by it. They're not like me or other people in the industry, or perhaps yourself, I don't know. But they see it as a means to make money. And as soon as they can get out of it, they jump as soon as they can. So that's what those people are like. They're not motivated by giving people freedoms or encouraging them to express their sexuality. They don't give a damn about that. They just see it for money. So that's why it makes logical sense for them to try and move on as soon as they can. I mean, the guy that owns Richard Desmond, who owned all of the Television X that I used to work at and the sex magazines, he jumped and did the Express newspaper and the Channel 5 he bought and stuff like this. You know, lots of people are really, they just see it as it's a business. It's not, and nothing particularly wrong with that. It's just not my thing. Yeah. It's just people, I wonder why they do it then if they're not particularly into it, because that will make you feel kind of bad about yourself when
exactly.
Yeah, so so I that's why that did. But with the OnlyFans, it's an interesting thing because the whole of the adult industry, the video industry in the last 20 years has been absolutely ripped apart financially. This is why I got out of porn in 2008, because between 2007 and 2008 I lost, I think it was about 70% of my income from porn. We were DVDs at that point, like in a year, and it was copyright theft. Everyone calls it file sharing. You can't compete. The porn industry is very strong on technology. We're the avant-garde of technology most of the time. So it's not that we were Luddites and we couldn't compete. We were just behind. No, we were ahead. We were the ones that introduced the technologies that eventually ate us up. But you can't compete against high quality, free product. It's impossible. People don't want to pay. So I just thought, well, the way that people were reacting was to pile it high and sell it cheap. And I didn't want to do that. I still very much believed in the products I made and I cared about it. So I just got out of the industry eventually a couple of years later. Yes. I went and did my PhD. That industry that still exists, the big companies are absolutely being ground down into the ground by sort of OnlyFans, but any form that allows sex workers porn stars to perform directly for people on the web. So that is the money has moved to the women, which is great, the performers, which is great, absolutely. But it has meant that creatively we are not getting the films made. So there's a whole kind of cultural shift away from narrative to just kind of individual. And also we were talking earlier about the difference between porn stars and sex workers is becoming minimalized as well, really. Yeah, so, which is fine for me. But so that it's good that women are getting more money out of it because they never got paid enough. But that also means that there's a loss of creativity and probably diversity of sort of imagery as well, because people are going to start doing whatever someone asks them to do, and those people aren't necessarily kind of creative types that are going to push the boundaries creatively. They're just going to ask for the average stuff.
Basic narrative stuff, not really kind of getting out there again. Yeah, no, that completely makes sense. It's I think it's an interesting conversation. I feel like as soon as there's one positive for a certain area in the industry, then someone else or another part of the industry is going to be affected, and I think that's why it's hit and miss.
Yeah, well, this is very true of anything to do with equalities and to do with, I see it all the time with gender. I used to teach at UCSB on the subject of gender and pornography as well as part of that. As soon as you do one good thing, a bad thing in somewhere else happens. And that is why gender and equalities like race and class and stuff is such a difficult subject, because people think it's an easy subject. They think people are just like banging on like they did in the 60s, but actually trying to find the intricate, it's like working out a clock or something, to find the intricate kind of means to promote equality in the greatest way is extremely difficult, because like, for instance, you'd have positive discrimination where you encourage, for instance, women or people of color to get jobs or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're denying other people who may be talented, who are not those people, from getting the job. So it's two sides to the same, and it's paradoxical, because you try and do one thing and like you say, an unintended consequence happens somewhere else. And it is just kind of impossible to work out. It's an impossible maze, you know.
Definitely. So a lot of girls contemplate becoming a part of kind of the sex work industry as a whole, you know, for a variety of reasons, such as we've mentioned before, quick money or, you know, the flexible hours. However, from the outside, there are limited resources for advice on what to do. If you were to give any advice to those considering joining the industry, what would you say?
I'd say know that you're never going to be able to get rid of it. It's got to be something that you'll stand up for and will say, yeah, I did that and I'm happy with it. And you can go see me and didn't I look great?
Yes.
And this is the other thing, you know, if I had video of me doing that when I was 21, I'd be like, this is great because I got a shot of me when I looked at my best. You know, when you get older,
it.
You know, I can say, that was me. So, you know, you've got those images and you can be proud of those or you can be ashamed of them regardless of your own personal take on it because of what people put onto you, what your family puts onto you. I've only had a couple of instances of porn stars coming back to me asking me to remove imagery from my website and stuff like that and it's always been because they're going through a court case, they're trying to get ownership of kids, you know, stepkids or something like this, and their partner is fighting against them, but they used to be a porn star before they had the kids. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's and it's things like that where people will use your job against you. I mean, you can write out. I mean, I found it difficult enough getting a job teaching at university. I had a PhD in the subject I was teaching. I had a published career of winning awards in the porn industry, and I was teaching on porn. But people will look at porn and they will say, no, especially in a department of feminist studies or gender studies, because there's going to be a lot of people that are sort of very antiquated in their thoughts and have more of a second wave bend where they see it as bad. But, you know, you can write out teaching for kids and stuff like that. You've got to know that you never want to do work with kids or work in a secondary school or something like that. You might get a teaching job higher up the hierarchy, but it's, you know, it's got to be in something, it's got to be relevant to the work, like me. And even then it was difficult. I walked away from that anyway because it's actually much more abusive. The university lecturer scene is far more, you know, there are more rights, employment rights being flouted there than probably in the sex industry. It's another thing like that, you know. There's lots of pockets of unfairness and inequality, for sure. Yeah, you've got to know that it's going to be out there forever. So you've got to be the sort of person who can take that on your back. You've also got to be aware that your fantasies and your private life have to be kept separate from your work. I had to learn that mentally. I had to make a line in my head. So for instance, I used to film a lot of my fantasies and stuff like that, but then I would find myself thinking about filming when I was having sex in real life, and it got a bit kind of like difficult. So you'll find, for instance, that I never talk about my personal sex life. That is a line that I put in my head as a means.
Fair enough reasons, you know, it's not.
Yeah. Otherwise you go a bit mad from it. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, where do I begin and where does everyone else end? Do you know what I mean? So you've got to make some rules in your head about like when you've got to section it off in your life a bit and say, you know, for instance, I didn't date anyone from the industry apart from one editor once. So that's how I managed it. It is a very strong, very potent thing, but it's amazing too. I'm making it sound terrible. I'm really
No, you're not, I promise.
But it was, you know, it's amazing and it's incredible because you'll meet a load of people that are really anti-establishment as well, that are just like, I'm doing this because it's anti what everyone says I should do, but I'm still going to do it. And that's great. But just know the realities of it. I love to see the idea that one day we're going to have sex workers who can be teaching kids. And hopefully, wouldn't it be great if they actually taught them about, you know, sex education? That would be like an actual use of their own resources.
Yeah, exactly, because you know, who else better? Because I'm not being funny, when I was in school we had I think once we had a PE teacher tell us about sex education, which I'm not discriminating PE teachers, but you know how they're probably just reading off like a laminated sheet that they got given, you know, by some people that have no idea all these things that we think that it needs to be like more educated in school, like, but to have someone that's actually been in the industry to bring awareness to children about, you know, just any sort of sex work. I mean, they don't have to go into like massive amounts of detail, but
yeah,
I think just to bring some sort of awareness to children about the industry, because there's just nothing.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So there is an irony in politics and the opinions that men, you know, have on porn, sex work, etc., as they'll be quick to discriminate those who work there, yet they'll spend hours watching porn or using webcam sites. You know, as a former female porn director, do you agree that the opinions men have on women in the industry need to change? And obviously I know that you've actually done a lot towards kind of changing how men should view women. But I just kind of wanted to ask you really, like, what else do you think there could be done, if anything, to kind of change or just help educate men on sex work, really?
Well, I don't think it's just men, unfortunately. I mean, you've got women in politics who are just as bad, really. And they can come from the left or the right. I just think generally, I mean, I was part of a group of people that were the Liberal Democrats, because I stood for the Lib Dems in 2010 for election. And so I kind of knew some people in the Lib Dems, and they actually interviewed me for some policy that they were making on sex work. And I was able to go in and tell them the real stuff. Like, for instance, how difficult it is to get a bank account. I'm not allowed an online Lloyd's. I had Lloyd's Bank, but I wasn't allowed to have an online means of taking money through Lloyd's, because they saw it as immoral. So things like that people don't know. And people, like I mentioned before, people having issues adopting and keeping hold of their kids and stuff like this. So there's a load of, if they've been a sex worker, there's a load of kind of stuff that the average person wouldn't really understand or guess, really.
Yeah.
That happens to people in the industry, kind of directly and indirectly. And yeah, we just have to have a more, you know, structured central legal system that allows for sex work, like the decriminalization, but also then you if you decriminalize something, I could, for instance, then, you know, pornography is not illegal. So there should have been something that I'd have been able to go to Lloyd's Bank and say, oi, you're not allowed to do this.
Yeah.
You know, to discriminate against me as a female pornographer. I should be allowed to have the same rights as every other member of the public who opens a bank account with you. But they were allowed to get away with that. So it's specific laws. You're not going to get companies to do the decent thing. Unfortunately, you have to make them scared of being fined, which means that you have to change laws. So it really is about going to politicians and campaigning on, you know, sort of more sort of liberal understandings of the sex industry. Yeah, I mean, I like I say, I get it out of your head that it's just men. Honestly, women can be just as bad. I mean, look at Gail Dines. She's a one-woman shit show in campaigning against, and she's a terrible researcher. Yeah, you know, she's just awful, and she's being influential in Iceland, for instance, in the government there. And her research is just objectively bad. But that doesn't matter, because she's a very good orator. She can shout down a room. I think she's from Yorkshire or somewhere.
Oh.
And yeah, so yeah, unfortunately, it's people who are set in their ways and their understandings of how sex works, how this industry works, but also how women work and what women want, you know.
I think there just needs to be a lot more education and, like you said, more campaigns. But I just hope that, you know, I'm still around when this stuff happens, because it would just be such a shame for, you know, sex workers to kind of dedicate their lives to the industry and then not really get back what they deserve.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, when I was at Central St Martin's doing my degree, I graduated in '98, and I thought, right, I'm going to work towards, I was doing porn, but I just thought, you know, the sexism in the film industry and the media industry was horrendous. Like it was just, you know, men did one thing, women did another, and race as well. And now I thought, oh, in 10 years time, I thought, oh, mid-noughties or whatever, it will be better. We'll be beyond this. It actually has taken up until now, like in the last 5 years, before I start to see things like a female Ghostbusters and programs like that. And it's unfortunate they're going back to men the next time, because I thought the woman one was way better. But you know, you're actually getting Black people and women who are writing their own narratives, and it's funny, good stuff. There's no loss of quality that was, you know, assumed would happen. Actually, no, just more variety and more great stuff is coming out. That took, so from mid-90s to, what's that, 30 years?
Oh God, there's no hope then.
Is it 20 years? 20 years, hang on a minute, for 30 years, yeah. So that's how long it takes that's my lifeline. So yeah, I started to want the sex industry to be given those kind of rights. Probably will in about another 20 years.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, you know, 20 years is better than 100 years, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting, isn't it? Your career has obviously led you to where you are today. And as a female, you have achieved a lot, especially helping like redefine misogyny. Do you have, I wouldn't say any regrets, but do you think if you could go back and maybe change the industry that you worked in or did a different career, would you do that, or would you not change a thing about kind of
I don't ever want to go back and do it again. I had a lot of fun, but it was also emotionally extremely difficult. I lived completely outside of my comfort zone. I had to be a avant-garde, kind of like right at the cutting edge, and that, you know, shredded relationships and stuff like that. So it took me till I was my early 30s before I met somebody and kind of had a proper relationship, and now married for, you know, we've been together for 15 years sort of thing. So that was extremely difficult. There are very few men who can take on board a female porn director, let me say, you know, where it define strength, because a lot of men don't have that. It's been my experience. So I don't want to go through all of that again, but I'm very proud of everything I've done, and I've never regretted any of it.
Yeah.
I also kind of suffered, call it sexual assault, through, ironically, no one in the industry, from someone on outside. So there was some difficult stuff. And, you know, there were years when I was working as a lecturer at UCSB and stuff, where I used to think it would have been a lot easier if I hadn't been a porn director previously, because I had the intellectual ability. So there were some downsides of it, but even so, I run my own business now. We actually make wine, and I run a bar that has a kind of academic, like a cultural thing I'm just starting up, with people coming giving talks and stuff. So I ended up ending up in academia and having the best of it, kind of being in charge and curating,
which is amazing.
Yeah, which is, you can think outside the box. You can always redefine things, especially now with so much technology. You know, the internet is amazing. It's not like when we were younger, when you had to use phone boxes.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just watching some programs from the early 80s at the moment. There's a series that used to be on called Bergerac. Tim and I are just watching them because it's kind of funny. But, you know, you're like, why don't you just sort this out? And it's like, they have to run to a phone box, you know, to do something. And that's why they act like that. You have to kind of, you know, think backwards. I think, what would I have done? I don't know. I haven't wasted my time on the planet at all. I went from porn, I did a master's in philosophy, then I did my PhD in gender studies. You know, I used to teach, and now I'm doing this. I think I would just say, be flexible and keep striving for what you want, but just know that, you know, the shortest way is not always in a straight line. Anything I regret? No, not really. Like we were talking about, I wish people were a little bit more liberal now. I think they're a bit better. Yeah,
there's slight improvement. I think it's just kind of taking a long time to kind of get to where ideally we want everyone to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I don't know what the history of places like Scandinavia are, what they were like historically, but they seem to, from the 60s, because there was this big thing, the invention of the pill in 1959, and so that's why you get the 60s and you get the Beatles, etc. is basically because the invention of the pill and the end of the war and the end of rationing. And so people suddenly become like really excited about, you know, being young and having fun, sort of thing. So you have that happening, and you wonder why in Scandinavia and places like the Netherlands, they managed to carry on with the kind of liberal sexual freedoms that they learnt in the 60s, whereas in England we retracted back in the 70s and the 80s and got very conservative again. So it'll take us a long time, but I don't know why it didn't do that in other places. What's the difference? What are their histories, to have managed to kept it going? Because they will teach kids about pornography at a young age and think nothing of it, and they'll have a younger age of consent. That's another thing I wrote about. I think the age of consent is, well, so I don't think people should work in porn under the age of 18. Absolutely not, because it's a different thing. From, you've got to know that, for instance, like I said earlier, that the images are always going to be there. So you need to have a certain amount of maturity to realise what you're getting into. But as for age of consent, I think if people are having sex under the age of 16 and they're consenting to it, I don't think there's a moral problem with that. You should own your own body and not have the state tell you what is right and wrong, because that's effectively what people do in homes, and that's how they abuse children, is because they sort of, whilst you're in our house sort of thing, you've got to do what we say. And that kind of mentality, I think, is bad around sexuality. I think we need to teach people to own their own bodies, and for young children to come out and say, don't touch me. We have to start from a young age of teaching them ownership of their own bodies and knowing what they like and what they consent to from a very young age. That is how you guard against paedophilia, and not just having an arbitrary number.
Well, yeah, because again, they just don't teach anything that you have just mentioned. I did not get taught in school. Like, it's just, this is why there's people that grow up not knowing like what is right, what's morally wrong, and all of this. And that's why there's so much kind of, and as well, I think a big thing is kind of a bit of a side note in television and film. I think having kind of graphic rape scenes is, I don't really know how I feel about it, because I feel like there's always going to be some people, unfortunately, that will watch that stuff and will think, well, now I know, like maybe I want to do that. Now I know how to do it. Like, I think it's very, people will see stuff in a film and they'll get, it's same with drugs and like sex. When you're younger, you kind of watch stuff and you think, oh, like, I really want to do that. That looks exciting. Awful how there's just no education about kind of rape and consent, and kind of how even in a relationship, if you say no, that means no. If you're married, if you've got a boyfriend, anyone, like, if you don't want to have sex, then that's that. It shouldn't be but actually, or but I was drunk, or but he's my husband. It should be no.
Yeah. This is all, be interested to see what they're teaching young people these days. But this is definitely stuff, consent, that needs to be taught, because we also need imagery that is, free to put out what it needs to put out as part of a story, but that you need to have the education of the masses of, to know the difference when rape is right and wrong, and that it's always wrong. There's no sort of like how it's put on TV as to whether it's done in a moral way or something. Do you know what I mean? You've got to have the underlying premise, the logic that no, you shouldn't do that, even regardless of how anyone makes a film about it. You should already have that internalized kind of morality. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly, which is why I think the line's kind of drawn, because if people aren't being educated on it, they'll then see it on social media or in a film, and then that will be their kind of source of education, which is why it never ends well, because they're only learning the kind of bad stuff that they've seen.
And this is if you look at Gail Dines, she says when she puts the word porn into a search engine, she gets a load of rape and nasty stuff come up. Well, that's why she's such a terrible researcher, because search engines rely on what you've written before and what you've you've Googled before and what you've watched before. Obsessed with abuse to women. So when she puts that one word in, she gets all of that, and she doesn't know that. She doesn't know that she's doing bad research, and that isn't. She thinks everyone puts the word porn in to their search engine and gets the same results as her. That's why she's not good enough at representing what she's doing, because you need someone to say that's bad research, regardless of the subject matter. There's good stuff out there. There's bad stuff. You should in theory have to keep going and looking for the bad stuff.
The discussions today have been the start of many future conversations to come on this podcast. Women in and out of the industry are being treated less than what they deserve, and it's very important that as a community of females, we work together to help bring change and awareness to the issues many have to face. Anna, you have been absolutely amazing today, especially as our first guest, and to share your insights and opinions. Thank you so much for listening today, and I do hope you join us for the next episode, which is going to be coming very soon. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.